This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good merry morning. Welcome back to another episode of Hit the Road Jack, Finding the Zodiac. I'd like to welcome everybody to our Christmas episode, if you will. So I have come dressed appropriately as Santa's little helper. I am bringing us back, obviously, into where we left off last week with the Epstein case. And of course, we have just a few slides we're going to go through, and I promise we're going to make it through that and climb right back into John Mark Karr and his involvement in the Jon Benet Ramsey case. I want to be able to at least share some interesting research, because we did talk a little bit last week about another inquiry in regards to a former suspect that we have talked about in the Zodiac case. So we'll cover a little bit of that information today, which really kind of just solidified what I had told the individual who was looking to do that research, because she was trying to reach out to Sandy Betts, and that's something that we'll talk about in those emails. But first, I wanted to start with an interesting post that I saw on Facebook last week, and we'll go ahead and put up the presentation for that so everybody can see what I'm talking about. I received this across my feed, and it's from a Taylor Lorenz, and she pointed out the fact that Democrats are working overtime to censor the entire internet, and this is why they're pushing laws like COSA, Screen Act, etc. Now, I'm going to have to do some research on those laws. I'm not sure what these laws are. Obviously, I don't stay in the loop of legislature, but it will be interesting to note what those laws are going to be, because when I finish what I have to say about this, you'll be blown away. They want to tie every single thing you say online to your government ID while criminalizing speech that they don't like. Now, we've already seen some of this play out in things like Facebook. You go to Facebook jail if you cross their lines. You speak about certain things on your YouTube podcast or on Facebook, and you will get banned for a period of time, and possibly even removed altogether, depending on how egregious they find your speech. So it goes on. This was really a post about Clinton. So she is reposting something from Defiant Els, who stated, "Oh, let's kill that phone." Who stated that Hillary Clinton, Americans who engage in misinformation should be criminally. I'm sorry. Let's put on some glasses. Wow. Should be civilly or criminally charged. Now, that blows me away coming out of this woman's mouth, because honestly speaking, I'm pretty sure that she is the queen of misinformation and lying. And I mean, look at what her entire family has done to the United States in regards to Bill Clinton in office, and her on the outside with her emails, and all of this controversy surrounding them with all of these suicided individuals. But for me, I have never really cared for the Clintons, and I've always believed that she was a liar. She is a FaceTime person. There were recordings from Bilderberg meetings where she had indicated that she doesn't even like Americans. I guess she would prefer to be in Europe. Well, so go to Europe and stop trying to navigate our government, please. And don't come out on any type of MSNBC or anything else talking about how we're misrepresenting or misinforming individuals, when I want to say 90% of the stuff that I get in trouble for on Facebook, somebody else has put there. Has that person been banned, blocked, or put in Facebook jail for it? Probably not. But to be told that it is untrue, well, that information information came from somewhere. And of course, we find these days, at least they're saying, that 90% of Americans are getting their news from social media. Well, we can't trust the news, so then we look to social media, and social media isn't accurate either. So I beg of people, do your research when you put things out there. Make sure that what you're forwarding or you're passing on to others, that it is actually something that's said. Because if this is true and that they can actually tie this back, I feel like this is something that they're actually doing in China, where you can be tracked for the things you said. But then if the Democrats are looking to do that and to push these laws, then are we really in a democracy anymore? Do we really have freedom of speech anymore? And I get it. There's a difference between freedom of speech and just passing on bad information or things that can harm or hurt a person. But for the most part, we should be able to speak our minds, whether it's in regards to our medical care or in regards to politics or how we feel about things. We should be able to say whatever we want to say. And of course, we see this on the heels of what Trump had said about the Reiners last week, which at first, when I read the post, I thought somebody else is writing this for him. It's written in third person. And then I went on to read additional news sources, which indicated that, yes, in fact, he was the one that wrote it, and the White House refused to take it down. I think that that's kind of proof in the pudding that he is pushing for freedom of speech. That's his thoughts. He's been in turmoil with the Reiners for a very long time, it sounds like to me, and that's the way he felt about it. And is he supposed to not say how he feels just because he's the president, or should he be honest about how he thinks? Now, I don't condone what he had to say. I myself thought that was a little brutal. We want to have a little bit more empathy. But as I've indicated, empathy is meant for our level of society. And that's why we all get upset. And then we're passing on what he said and we're bashing him and calling him out because we have the empathy. If they had empathy, all of our homeless problems and our hungry problems would be solved. So back to the research. I had a reach out from a gal named Christina, which I talked about briefly last week in regards to her interest in Lawrence. She calls him Kane. In my research, I could only find that he had ever written his name as K-A-Y-E, or as Klein. So he was originally born Klein, and he changed his name to K. Now, how Kane came about, I'm not exactly sure. That would require more research. I'm just not willing to do because I don't find that he's a plausible suspect for the Zodiac. But she reached out saying, I have questions on Kane, primarily because he lived near the Presidio where Stein was shot, worked in Lass's building at the hotel, and someone also told me he interacted with Farron. And I don't know who someone else is, but she says, I've been analyzing the Zodiac letters, but more for occult symbolism, which is abundant. Now, mind you, she has a undergrad of criminal forensics, I believe, in journalism and in psychology. So she kind of matches me on my undergraduate, so I can see where she's coming from psychologically, wanting to look at these for that occult or that cult type system. She says, and comparing and contrasting to the Son of Sam and Black Dahlia letters. So it's very interesting. She's finding a connection herself between Zodiac and the Black Dahlia letters. Son of Sam is something I've pondered, but they did obviously get Berkowitz for that. And in the end, I would think that he has indicated or intimated that there was a group of people. And I believe just by the docuseries alone, you can tell that there was an actual group involved with that. She says, I'm also in contact with David Berkowitz and have been since 2022. He granted me access to his military records, including medical. Maybe you'd like to review a signature on his military document. I had no idea you were a handwriting expert. And then she writes, a enlistment officer, which I'm not sure why. It is troublesome. I received them from National Archives, also from the Bronx DA to double check pre-subpoena. No change across the document. So evidently she is indicating, and I want to say it's Kane that she wanted me to look at, but I'll have to double back on that. Her real goal at this point was to talk to Sandy Betts. So I passed the message on to Sandy Betts, and after explaining to Christina why I did not believe Lawrence Klein, or K, was the legitimate suspect of the Zodiac, and that was because he had prefrontal lobe damage, and his handwriting is very rudimentary. His line quality is extremely poor, and that usually it is indicative of having a lower level of education, which is consistent with what I find about him and his background. So I had ruled him out. And this was Sandy Betts' response in regards to that. She says, hi, Nanette, I'm okay, but I got another death threat from my suspect on December 1st, 2025. I'd be really interested in seeing that, Sandy. I hope all is well with you. Tell the person who likes Kane for a Z suspect that Larry Kane has been proven to not be the Zodiac. Detective Tom Bruton from SFPD went to meet Kane, got his DNA, prints, and handwriting. Nothing matched. It was Vallejo PD in 1990 who told me the picture I have of my suspect looked like Kane. Darlene's family told me the picture I took was who followed and killed Darlene. They thought he was Kane. I wasted 10 years investigating Kane, believing he was my stalker. It wasn't until Kane died and my suspect was still following me that I knew he wasn't Kane. However, they looked a lot alike. Now, I've seen her suspect and I've seen these pictures of Kane. I'm not really maybe she's got a different picture. Maybe I'm looking at something else. I will have to confirm that with her, but I'm not seeing a likeness there. Anyway, she goes on to say that a guy who has, I'm getting feedback. Oh, hi. That's
Yes, I was about to say something. Hey, so this is really interesting, and I've actually thought about reaching out to David Berkowitz before because since it's been so long, I feel like he would have more leeway of them allowing people to talk to him. So this
well,
is very
evidently
interesting.
I guess it's just about whether or not he accepts your invitation to
Yep.
speak because he's having conversations with this gal here.
Mm-hmm.
So Sandy goes on to say a guy who has a website, his name is Alex Bader from Philly, Pennsylvania. He sent that letter that was left for me from my suspect in 1986 to the nation's top expert, Kurt Baggett. Both Baggetts confirmed that letter was written by Zodiac, as well as a few other experts. I don't know who she's saying a few other experts because we've had conversations, and as far as I knew, Bart Baggett was the only person that had stated this. And interestingly enough, these are both the mentors I came in under when I began to learn handwriting. This is the school I went to. And I don't know why she doesn't seem to remember or hold in her head, because I've discussed with her the fact that Bart Baggett named another suspect. He named Deborah Perez way back from 20, I want to say it was 20, must have been 2010, 2009. When I started this case, he had informed me he was working on a documentary and a book deal in regards to a potential suspect. And what I found out was that later he had employed Deborah Perez. And I want to say employed because he would have had to have taught her how to write like the Zodiac, or at least somebody would have. And he stated that she showed a genetic predisposition to write like the Zodiac, who was her father, and that was the suspect they were going to name. I was then contacted by the actual biological daughter of the man that they were claiming was the Zodiac, and I did an analysis of his handwriting, and there is no way he was the Zodiac. He didn't even write with lowercase letters. He was pure capitalization or cursive writing. He did not actually use lowercase. So it would have been really complicated for him to write smoothly and freely in that manner when that's just not it would have looked more rudimentary like Kane's handwriting. So I explained all this to her, and at the time she was very shocked by it. I don't know why she doesn't seem to remember that Bart Baggett, if he's called out another suspect and claimed that that individual had a genetic predisposition, only for us to then find out that that woman wasn't even biologically related to the man they were about to blame, which really got me in a lot of trouble with Bart, because when I took the case on for Dennis, he didn't want me to give my opinion. He told me not to. I could be kicked out of the school. I could lose my tuition. There was this great big huge like political mess surrounding me even dealing with this case, and I was physically sick to my stomach because I was seeing the truth in the handwriting from Jack Terrence. So all in all, I'm not going to continue on with her email from this point on, but all in all, I would have thought she would have at least rationalized you're dealing with two people who are helping to facilitate the misinformation in these cases, because not only have they claimed the wrong suspect, they've worked with Tom Voight, they've been on John Walsh's America's Most Wanted, all of these things that wrap up around where I'm saying these people are trying to prevent us from finding the truth. And that's really showing itself really well in Christina. Christina is well educated and going out for her journalism major, and here she is doing research on a case where she comes across information she believes points her in the direction of a suspect she doesn't know has already been cleared, long since cleared, just like Arthur
Yeah.
Lee Allen.
Yep. That's what I was
It
gonna
makes
say. It reminds me a lot about him. It seems very. There's so many similarities to that, to him being
yeah.
the named suspect.
Well, and if there's enough information out there for people to come to the conclusion that Cain somehow, and Cain, again, I've never seen anything that this man's written where he called himself Cain. So I don't know if they just called him Cain because they found those letters in the 340 and decided, oh, I'm gonna, it must be a guy named Cain. Well, it's almost like they twist the information to fit the suspect they're trying to blame. But I didn't see anywhere this man called himself Cain. So
Yeah.
Onward, upward.
Moving forward.
Moving forward. Yeah, we got to get through this Epstein stuff. He's making me crazy. I'm about done with him. I'm so mad over all of this stuff. When I look at how protected.
You just have to kind of take bits and pieces of it because it's so much that like, and it's hard for us to comprehend and would to portray it, rather than just being thrown in there. Like we've been in it and then we see how crazy it is. So you just have to kind of like take breaks literally from it. And then like you always come back to it because it always wraps itself right back around its web, so.
Yeah. I mean, the degrees of separation here are none. There are no degrees of separation. You have no choice but to climb back in. But to watch and see how these people were protected over their dastardly deeds, whether it was the fall of the real estate market in 2008, we're starting to see that there are more things that Epstein has been involved with, but has been protected from and never been busted. Not in any Ponzi scheme, not in this Bear Stearns thing. Like this man could turn evidence and now all of a sudden he's important. We're not going to mess with him. We've got DAs. In fact, let me just continue on with this here article because it's just another area of protection. So it says Epstein served almost 13 months of his 18-month sentence before being released in July 22nd, 2009, for a year of probation on house arrest until August 2010. His early release after 13 of 18 months served was because he provided information regarding the Bear Stearns executives Ralph Cioffi and Matthew Tannen, whose conduct was scrutinized by the SDNY court in the In Bear Stearns Companies, Inc.'s securities derivative and ERISA litigation before the bank was acquired by JP Morgan Chase. While on probation, he was allowed numerous trips on his corporate jet. Who is on probation and gets on their corporate jet? To his residences in Manhattan and the U.S. Virgin Islands. He was allowed long shopping trips and walks around Palm Beach for exercise. After a contested hearing in January 2011 and an appeal, he stayed registered in New York State as a level 3 high risk of repeat offense sex offender, a lifelong designation. Now, I want everybody to understand that they in another article that I read where he was allowed to return to Manhattan in the U.S. Virgin Islands, they called this his primary homes. Now, he's in real estate. I've been in real estate, and anybody who's been in real estate knows that you're only allowed to have one primary residence. The sole purpose for that is a lower interest rate than you would receive on any secondary vacation or rental properties. And that's for the mortgage industry. So for them to have called him his primary residence it's completely laughable. It's just a rich person getting away with whatever he wants to get away with. It says, at the hearing, the Manhattan Assistant District Attorney, Jennifer Gaffney, argued unsuccessfully that the level should be reduced to a low-risk level 1 and was chided by the judge. Now, Lindsay, are you with me? I can see you there, but I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you. So why would a district attorney be arguing to knock him from a level 3 high risk of repeat offender to a low risk level 1? The DA, the person supposed to be prosecuting and advocating for these victims, is arguing that it should be reduced, and probably so that he could travel, do what he wanted to do, and all the other things. But I thought it was interesting.
Not only that, but in order for all the other ones that are connected to him could do what they needed to do as well.
Right. And I honestly think sometimes when I'm researching and I'm reproducing and I'm pulling from media and I'm pulling from things like Wikipedia, both sources that I know that have been incorrect and shared the wrong information, and then I'm using it to actually put together this information on the presentation, wondering all the while, is it correct? Was this sentence meant to say that Jennifer Gaffney argued unsuccessfully against reducing it to a level 1? And that's a mistake by Wikipedia, or was she and the judge was disgusted with her, or was the judge disgusted with her because she was trying to oppose it being placed into a level 1, and he had even higher protection from the judge? I mean,
I think it was
feel
just
like
thrown in there, just so it wouldn't look so bad.
I feel like a judge has lateral movement to decide, even if somebody's being charged with something, whether or not they want to hit them harder than they are allowed, or not. I want to say allowed to, but have to.
Yeah, because I mean they have the authority to do whatever they want.
That's what I thought. I mean, and what judge didn't say no, you don't get probation. No, you don't get to get on your jet and go to these other places. Like, where's the protection for these individuals? There are none. It says, despite opposition from Epstein's lawyer that he had a main home in the U.S. Virgin Islands, the judge confirmed he personally must check in with the New York Police Department every 90 days. Though Epstein had been a level 3 registered sex offender in New York since 2010, the New York Police Department never enforced the 90-day regulation, though non-compliance is a felony. Non-compliance is a felony. He did not comply. And New York, see, I thought in the end, wasn't it New York and the FBI from New York were the ones that really kind of finally held him accountable for his crimes?
Yeah, that's right, which really is very interesting, and it's very strange because of all people, I wouldn't think it would be New York.
Right.
You mean, maybe New York over than Florida.
Well, Florida gave him his break too, right? I mean, isn't that where he originally was supposedly arrested or investigated, and it was the DA from Florida that gave him the sweet deal?
Yep.
Hey. All right, reactions. The immunity agreement and Epstein's lenient treatment were the subject of ongoing public dispute. The Palm Beach police chief accused the state of giving him preferential treatment, and the Miami Herald said U.S. Attorney Acosta gave Epstein the deal of a lifetime. Following Epstein's arrest in July 2019 on sex trafficking charges, Acosta resigned as Secretary of Labor effective July 19th, 2019. What? Oh, he resigned. Okay. After the accusations against Epstein became public, several persons and institutions returned donations that had received from him, including Elliot Spitzer and Bill Richardson and the Palm Beach Police Department. Harvard. Oh, wow. So he gave money. He gave donations to the Palm Beach Police Department. That starts to make a little more sense now. Harvard University announced it would not return any money. Various charitable donations that Epstein had made to finance children's education were also questioned. On June 18th of 2010, Epstein's former house manager, Alfredo Rodriguez, was sentenced to 18 months incarceration after being convicted on an obstruction charge for failing to turn over to police and subsequently trying to sell a journal in which he had recorded Epstein's activities. FBI Special Agent Christina Pryor reviewed the material and agreed it was information that would have been extremely useful in investigating and prosecuting the case, including names and contact information of material witnesses and additional victims. All right, so where's this book? I want to know why we haven't seen that. Everybody keeps calling for the Epstein's files. What about this guy's journal on people he has recorded that has been to the island? So the investigation in France on August 23rd, 2019, the prosecutor's office in Paris, France, opened a preliminary investigation into Epstein after Yael Meloul wrote to the Paris prosecutor to report the international dimensions of the pedophile network involving Jeffrey Epstein, criticizing the slow pace of justice. He is being investigated for rape and sexual assault of minors under and over the age of 15, criminal association with a view to committing crimes, and association with criminals with a view to committing offenses. The prosecutor said that the goal of the investigation is to find possible crimes committed in France and elsewhere against French citizens. An associate of Epstein, modeling agent Jean-Luc Brunel, was arrested during this investigation, but was found dead in his jail cell in 2022. All right. Dead in his cell. Was that another suicide or suicided? Either way. Notable criminal associates. Epstein associated with Harvey Weinstein, and they had a favorite outdoor table at a restaurant in the Hamptons. However, Epstein severed his relationship with Weinstein when the latter acted too aggressively with one of his favorite girls. Wow. Club memberships. Epstein was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations from 1995 to 2009, the Trilateral Commission, and the Rockefeller Institute, and the Institute of International Education. So some of the articles that I found that backed up some of the information from Wikipedia, again, I'm looking for 2 to 3 sources that are repeating pretty much the same thing. Hopefully that identifies some truth versus, oh, well, that was just mentioned by one, tabloid or one crazy magazine that talks off cuff about things that aren't true. So this is another from Forbes. So this is the Forbes staff. Zachary Folk wrote, Epstein's connections. These are the billionaires and top officials he's been tied to. Top line, President Donald Trump is expected to sign a law compelling the Justice Department to release the remaining files on Jeffrey Epstein, the late financier who has been linked with numerous famous and powerful people in government, as well as in the business world. Government figures and world leaders with ties to Epstein. Andrew Mountbatten from Windsor. Epstein was close with the former Prince Andrew, the brother of the UK's King Charles III, who has since had his royal titles removed following scandal over his relationship with Epstein. Andrew confirmed he stayed at the Epstein's home after his conviction in 2008, and he ended up paying to settle a lawsuit brought by Virginia Giuffre, one of the Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's victims. So there's one person. Former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, Catherine Rumler, Steve Bannon, business figures with ties to Epstein, Thomas Pritzker, Leon Black. All of these people are millionaires, billionaires, you name it. It comes back down to Reid Hoffman and Peter Thiel. This is the PayPal mafia that we spoke about last week. So now we have a secondary article in the Forbes magazine stating that there is allegations of associations there. So kind of in the whole, I want to do a basic rundown on John Mark Karr as a overall summary of what we were discussing and how he was able to get away with these things that we're talking about. So we know that in 2000, John Mark Karr moves from Alabama to Petaluma, California, 0.8 of a mile from Klaas's home. He evidently has some interest in Polly Klaas and her murder, which doesn't really make any sense because she was killed in 1983. This is more than 17 years later. It doesn't really seem that somebody would be that interested 17 years later, or even believe that the parents still lived in the same area. There's really no reason to believe that he moved to Petaluma because of Klaas. But 2001, John Mark Karr is arrested as a substitute teacher for having child pornography on his computer. 2001, Cass, John Mark Karr's attorney, states that John Mark Karr was under suspicion for involvement in the Jon Benet Ramsey case and had an interest in both Klaas and Ramsey cases. October and November 2001, John Mark Karr is released from jail on supervised release 45 days before trial. John Mark Karr missed his hearing before trial and had left the country, going to Malaysia and ultimately to Thailand. In 2002, the letter to Tom Voigt came from Malaysia. In 2003, the letter to Tom Voigt came from Thailand. And let me restate that. The Zodiac killer letter. So it would appear that the Zodiac was in Malaysia mailing these letters to Tom Voigt, or that the Zodiac was in Thailand mailing this letter to Tom Voigt. I believe that this is probably more of a connectivity that's happening here with John Mark Karr. The reason why he left the country after being released, the reason why he was probably released, or they got him released, was in order to facilitate these other type of cons. So circa 2002 to 2003, John Mark Karr begins email communications with Michael Tracy, giving inside information about JBR's murder that showed inside information or a connection to this case, as stated by John Mark Karr's attorney, Cass, until his capture in 2006. And I'm still kind of wavering on the capture part, because I had originally believed that he walked in and turned himself in, and that happened a mere 9 days after Jack Terrence passed away in the hospital. Then I see that Michael Tracy maybe helped hunt him down and figure out that he was working at another school in Thailand and that the police showed up there. So I've seen pictures where they're basically, hunkering down and scoping him out from the outside, and that he was then arrested and taken into the Thailand jail. So I'm still kind of up in the air about what the truth is there. 2006, John Mark Karr, like I said, is he either located and arrested at another school or he turns himself in. I'm not sure. 2006, John Mark Karr is extradited back to Los Angeles. I don't really understand why he was extradited back there, but subsequently then extradited back to Colorado. So was this to prep him, to prepare him for whatever he was going to say once he got there, to either exonerate him of those charges or to come up with excuses or ways that he possibly knew the information that granted or gave him that free ride back from Thailand? Because remember, I have not heard one word that this man has suffered any type of restitution in connection with his false braggings about having been the killer, about the free jet ride back from the UK or from Thailand. I've not heard about this man having to pay for anything that he caused during this time frame. So after he's extradited back to Colorado, the confession was found to be false. DNA is not a match, and I would assume his handwriting was not a match, though I've not read anything in specifics in regards to that. But it was not a match to the ransom note. So why was he not convicted for giving false statements to law enforcement and charged for the tax dollars wasted in recovering him? There's my question. Then he's extradited back to Sonoma County on the child pornography charges, where he is exonerated from the charges due to lack of evidence because authorities has lost his computer as proof of his activities. And then his file on the charges were ultimately sealed by the judge. Like, oh my God, we've got another thing that just absolutely blows my mind. You don't seal the charges. The man was still arrested based on evidence that they found. They collected the child pornography off of his computer, which is how he got arrested, how he ended up spending 5 months in jail. It's not here where we're saying we don't know if he murdered the guy. We're, building up the forensics or the evidence in order to be able to convict him. They found it on his computer. They took his computer, they put it into evidence. He was going to trial. And yet this entire situation, all in the benefit of John Mark Karr, is then sealed and put to rest. And he is released and let go to be free. Then John Mark Karr becomes a woman to conceal his identity. And this is where it really screams undercover or cover up. I know that your face was blasted all over international news over this particular case, but honestly speaking, at most you would have been considered a liar. At worst, you would have been considered a pedophile. Either way, be who you're going to be. Why change into being a woman? You obviously like girls. Just ridiculous. It makes no sense other than to conceal his identity. So I continued on with the emails between Michael Tracy and John Mark Karr. They spanned approximately 4 years, which again, I find it extremely interesting. We have an individual who's reaching out to another journalist. So Michael Tracy, I'm not sure who he's a journalist for, maybe investigative reporter or what have you, but John Mark Karr chooses to actually have communications back here in the United States with somebody who could, again, report this news. So to me, it just feels like the media involvement just never seems to end. I actually took notes. So it's approximately 402 pages of emails, very time consuming to read. Some of it is very blasé. Some of it appears as though we're dealing with two different people who are writing, because we've got whiny John Mark Karr, and then it felt like to myself and Terry Batcher that we were both hearing the words from Jack Terrence or the Zodiac at the same time. But we know that John Mark Karr is definitely not the Zodiac. So our thoughts was there was a possibility that John Mark Karr was receiving information and things in regards to the Zodiac or from the Zodiac in his emailed to him, and then he was turning around and submitting that to Michael Tracy. So here's some of the things that I found were interesting. On page 64, Karr wrote "brilliant distraction." Now that to me it's Zodiac 101, because he really believed that he gave the police time-consuming work to play around with them, so they'd be running around in opposite directions looking for the wrong person. So that brilliant distraction is exactly that. And I don't see that John Mark Karr was really any type of a brilliant distraction, unless his brilliant distraction was from the Zodiac. Because quite frankly, if you are busted on pedophilia charges and you leave the country only to turn around and admit to some type of crime that gets you brought right back here and you're found innocent of all of those, again, a brilliant distraction. So he says magician's sleight of hand. I feel like I heard that before in something that I was looking at in the Zodiac stuff, but it definitely seems like a ploy that the Zodiac used. Page 85, Karr says, you would not recognize me. And of course, the Zodiac ploy he wrote about, however, the writing seems very female, but Karr is going through female gender identification. I don't re-identification. I don't know at what point he started doing this. I feel like when he came back, he had not made any of these changes yet. He definitely looked like the same man he was. And it wasn't until, years after he had gotten back and was excluded from these crimes that he started to make these changes. I'm sorry. Are we back, Lindsay? Okay. Yeah, so I showed that he was going through female gender identification and later in 2008 made a switch to Alexis Wright. This may have been a ploy to change appearance due to notoriety and not wanting to be recognized. Page 88, Jon Benet Ramsey to be with her Daxus. Zodiac slave to be with him in afterlife. So this kind of is some of the similar statements. All my letters are important to me as were those to the Zodiac, which I thought was an interesting statement for him to make. He then says merit, life based on Zodiac's deep desire to receive recognition for his deeds. On page 110, reference to Stephen King and writing mega pages. Now, if we remember the letters that went to Tom Voigt, the Zodiac author said he wanted it to be a mega hit. So to see mega pages, mega hit, we've got, again, some of these similar linguistics. Need to know if the public is interested in him or not is of great importance to him, just like Zodiac. There's a strong desire to dispel the untruths told about the case, again, just like Zodiac. On page 156, there's more concern about people not believing him than hating him. And that also was something that we heard in the Tom Voigt letters. I'm sorry. Let me take that back. Not the Tom Voigt letters, but Jack Terrence himself had indicated to Dennis Kaufman that he was more concerned about what the people he knew would think of him than having been charged with the Zodiac cases. So he wanted Dennis Kaufman to wait until he had died in order to write the book that stated Jack Terrence was the Zodiac. Page 166, there's a reference to Patsy and Jon Benet walking in the gardens of paradise. So we have the mention of paradise. On 166, there's a poem about dying because Patsy had died. And we know that I make several references to poems and poetic references that are in the Zodiac stuff. Sorry, you guys, getting over a chest cold. 166 to 167, there's threats of suicide, descending into the depths. Now, this is much like the Riverside letter of walking into the ocean, where he says, sorry, Mary. And then, of course, we had the Titwillow, going into the billowy waves, all of these signs of death or suicide. On 171, Tracy calls Daxus poetic. I've been calling Zodiac that for years. On 273, there's reference to time. 275, double life in so many other cases. Again, something we heard Zodiac talk about. On page 286, I've been running for years on all levels. I'm not really quite sure what that meant, because he really wasn't running from much up until he was busted in 2001. So we're only talking, and maybe his reasoning for putting years was that he began running in 2001, and then these messages started in 2002. Page 316 uses 2030 for a time reference, which is a military reference. I don't know that John Mark Karr spent any time in the military, but he also references the snow. We have movie and media references, just like the Zodiac. So on page 96, watched A&E interview, just like Zodiac watched Badlands and other media on the case. Michael Tracy and David Mills filming documentaries with the Ramseys. Daxus contacted David Mills, just like the Scorpion contacted John Walsh as a suspect, wanting to tell the truth. Tim Miller did the same thing to Zodiac equals Tom Voigt, trying to get his story out there. Daxus calls himself like Stephen King, then thanks Tracy for comparing the likes of him to Stephen King. I'm extremely confused. So what is this little game that they're playing back and forth? I really don't get it. On page 126, he says, Patricia and John used that quote because it was heavily influenced by a similar quote in a favored film. On page 313, knows that Tracy is making a documentary on the 10-year anniversary of JBR's death. Page 334, Shakespeare Bookstore. 339, Vogue Bambini Magazine. 347, wants Johnny Depp to play him in the movie. We know that the Zodiac says, I wonder who'll play me in the movie. 393, Roger Waters, When the Tigers Broke Free, the Wall DVD. 394, he refers to the Executioner's song, and we know that this is something that is very much Zodiac. 397, book reader and movie watcher. Page 400, Sound of Music was playing on the computer. Page 402, he refers to Rain Man. And page 378, interviewers he likes: Larry King, Charlie Rose, Michael Tracy. And it seems it cut off. I didn't either continue or I thought there was going to be an additional person. But let me just take you back to Larry King, because Bart Baggett, the one that worked with Tom Voigt and on John Walsh's America's Most Wanted, was also the consultant for Larry King. The circles just kind of keep taking me back, just like Lindsay said. Page 378, Catch Me If You Can. That's DiCaprio and Hanks, right? All right, make sure I'm on time here still. So continuing with those emails, John Mark Karr claims of already having been investigated for murder and child molestation, and family were okay with JBR's attraction until the investigation. Page 86. What investigation? He clearly is indicating a previous investigation into him on page 89 and 94, which is a direct statement to being investigated for JBR's death, but there's no mention of John Mark Karr as a possible suspect being investigated until these emails, until I saw the article where Cass, his attorney, indicated that individuals had believed him to be involved in some sort of way with Jon Benet Ramsey's death. He claims that he's had multiple residences. Page 96 claims use of Gothic devices. I wanted to check to see what was meant by that, but I never did figure that out in all the emails. He said he had a deep love for Patsy Ramsey. And did Jack Terrence follow her around too, I wondered? Sick, perverted love for a mother, as described by many psychologists when referring to the Zodiac. Has mother issues. Page 158, Daxus covers his sexual intimacy with his mother. Psychologists long since explained a perverse love of the mother in the Zodiac case, so it seems to kind of fit the bill. We're dealing with almost, it sounds like, two from the same egg. Seems this was a ploy to further a previous abuse charge, as if JBR was to have understood this type of love already, and she didn't. Author recognizes that Tracy never says his name in his letters, which is a huge way the suspect speaks in these communications. On page 109, Tracy asks why Karr hates silence so much. I'm starting to think that the time is running out for Jack Terrence and not Patsy. His patience is running out, and he believes the truth will never come out, as it hasn't in the past. And he's about to die. So some of these I'm comparing directly to what I believe Jack Terrence is probably looking for after trying to reach out to so many individuals to say, hey, you guys, I am the person. I want to tell my story. You need to get it right. But he still wants to do it from an incognito or an anonymous stance. And it doesn't seem that anybody's willing to pay that kind of attention. On page 157, it says, better do this quick. He's out of work, out of money, and this is a ploy for getting books out now, or the urgency to make money off of books from this story. On page 224, reference to phone calls being recorded. I know that was something that Dennis said that Jack taught him, and Dennis employed on many people. We've heard him record from law enforcement, from San Francisco PD, from the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department, from the FBI. We have recordings on all of their not all of their interactions, but several of their interactions. On page 233, wants pic of standing in front of his grandmother's home for the opening in the book. Very interesting. July 13th, time is running out to write this book. Why? What is running out on July 13th for John Mark Karr? I mean, clearly he doesn't. If he was being investigated or followed and was subsequently arrested, he wouldn't have known that this was coming. If he knew that Jack had just passed and that there was a potential for Dennis outing all of this information before the book is written, that might express some type of a concern or a time restraint of getting it done. But it doesn't make any sense that time is running out on July 13th for him. Well, he was arrested I think it said August 17th, because Jack died on August 6th or 8th. So yeah, I think it was about 7 days after 15th of August. Okay, so about 2 months before he's even actually supposedly having been tracked. A few more weeks to deal with them is what he says, and Saturday if it comes. Sounds like there's a pending death or some type of apprehension. But he's alluding to the fact that his time's coming to an end when clearly John Mark Karr was still young as can be and not suffering from anything medical or health-wise. Page 317, the phone, it says phone active for a year if I am around to answer it. So did he give a phone number? I didn't see a phone number in any of these communications, but he's indicating that there's a way for him to be contacted. On 319, he says father abandoned him when he was 6, but claimed earlier that his dad responded negatively to him visiting Jon Benet Ramsey's grave. So that's where the two authors' theory kind of hits home. Now, was he just lying about his dad having passed at 6 to give that, oh, poor me, thought to the individual he's talking to? Or are we definitely dealing with two different authors? Because he couldn't have been responded to negatively for having visited Jon Benet Ramsey's grave if his dad had left him when he was 6. Author goes back and forth between love and hate with the person he claims abandoned him, but other revelations indicate that John Mark's father was still in his life. Page 334 speaks of surgeries, which is obviously a lie, at least until 2008 for John Mark Karr, because he was clearly still a man when he was arrested. Page 339 claims his mom died when he was 6. So again, are we back to another lie? Like, what is happening? Page 346, the departure point 3,000 miles from his home. Supposedly he had 3 homes. Sonoma County released with departure from East Coast shortly after or around the mailing of anthrax. Page 346, there's an undeveloped roll of film taken, CDs, music, and computer. And I'm assuming that was possibly what was taken in the case back in Sonoma County. It didn't really allude to which that had been taken for. Page 353, must finish book before August 15th. Now, that is an interesting point because I think that's why I thought he turned himself in. He gave a deadline for the book needing to be written by that point. Jack dies on August 8th, August 15th. He is given as a deadline for the time frame in which his book needs to be written, as he's currently, I guess, turning himself in or thinking about doing so, maybe pending the death. Well, it looks like we are I'm going to say we're down to 47 on the clock, but I just got my 1-minute timer. Last on page 417, it seems the sex changes so that he can be a nanny that puts him close to little girls, not because he is identifying with being female by any means. If that's true, that's sick, because not only is he changing his identity, but he's changed his name. He's done everything to get himself to be a nanny for little girls, and that's very scary. So we're going to have to pick up from here and carry on with the rest of this information on John Mark Karr next week. I hope everybody has a wonderful Christmas and holiday season. Enjoy your family and your loved ones. Have a great weekend, and we will see you guys next Friday.